If you've played the original Resident Evil game, you're probably still missing out on content you never knew existed. The original Resident Evil was released on the PlayStation 1, Microsoft Windows, the Sega Saturn, and the Nintendo DS. We're not talking about the remake or remastered versions here. The original version alone has a lot to offer in each port of the game, and today we'll be taking a look at each of them, as it turns out that every version of the original Resident Evil has its own exclusive content. Now, there are 3 versions of the original Resident Evil that were released before Resident Evil 2. That's Resident Evil Director's Cut, and Resident Evil Director's Cut DualShock Edition. Let's start with the PlayStation 1 version. In the very first version for the PlayStation, there was no auto-aim in the Western releases, but it was available for the Japanese version. You could only use the D-pad to move your character. The intro was censored and in black and white, but it was uncensored for the Japanese version. Still in black and white though. Kenneth's death scene was censored, but once again, the Japanese version was not. And there are 2 exclusive songs featured on the Japanese version as well, an opening song and an ending song by Fumitaka Fujigami. Here are some more exclusives for the Japanese version. There are background images for all the files, which we only got a black background for the international versions. The Japanese version also included a difficulty adjustment with difficulty descriptions on the character select screen. Chris and Jill's costume is different in each version. The Sega Saturn version includes an exclusive battle mode option, which has the player attempt to survive through rooms of monsters with both limited ammo and limited time. The Sega Saturn port also includes a few extra enemy encounters, such as a second T-002 Tyrant that breaks out directly after the one Wesker released. It also features a model edit of the hunter known as the Tick. In the battle mode, one of the cool exclusives is that you can actually encounter Wesker Zombie. He's a tougher zombie than the rest of the undead hordes, and you'll even get to encounter a Golden Tyrant. The PC version has the same features as the PlayStation 1 version, including the uncensored colored intro. It supported 3D accelerator cards allowing for much better graphics. There are different alternate costumes for each character. The door animations are skippable, but what truly made the PC version better was that both Chris and Jill got an exclusive weapon. Chris got an FN Minimi, and Jill got a MAC-10. Now, here's something I have to add before we move on to Resident Evil Director's Cut. When I made the video on Richard Eichen, by the end I mentioned that Joseph Frost was carrying an Uzi, but now we know that it could have been a MAC-10, which would explain why Jill would have this weapon in the game. And as for the FN Minimi, this weapon looks very similar to the weapon that Chris is holding in the front cover of the game. For the longest time I always wondered what weapon was Chris holding in the front cover of the game. And yes, it's Chris Redfield, not Richard Eichen in the front cover. So now that we know that the FN Minimi could in fact be the weapon Chris is holding in the front cover, then it makes you wonder, why was this weapon used as an exclusive gun for the PC version? If there was going to be multiple versions of the original Resident Evil released, then it should have been mandatory to include the FN Minimi to every version of the original. Maybe someone made a mistake. But now let's take a look at the Director's Cut. This version has an original and standard mode, which are based on the original Japanese version's difficulty. There's a training mode, which is not actually a training mode, it's their way of calling it an easy difficulty mode. There's an advanced mode included, which mix up the puzzle item locations, ammo, health, and amount of enemies that appear, and randomize the locations of the enemies. There's also a random chance to get a headshot with the handgun, which became very useful. There are even some rearranged camera angles and retextured rooms, but most importantly, a forest spare scene is included. The intro is still censored, as well as Kenneth's death, but for the French and German versions, they actually received the uncensored and colored intro. The US version was advertised as uncensored, and as you can see, it was mentioned in the box reverse, but it was still censored. The intro and Kenneth's death stayed censored, auto-aim was included, you could still only move the character with a D-pad. The Japanese version now used the same instrumental opening and ending songs from the international versions. Jill, Chris, and Rebecca each got a new costume for the rearranged mode, and the retail version came with the trial for Resident Evil 2. The DualShock version of Resident Evil Director's Cut featured rumble support as well as the analog stick movement support. The international version has increased difficulty. This version was not released in Europe, and it's available on the US PlayStation Network store. But the worst feature included was the new soundtrack that replaced the original soundtrack. It was a very unnecessary choice, especially since this new soundtrack was undeniably horrid, making you wonder if a single soul even bothered to check the game's soundtrack before releasing the game. This song sounds like the world's greatest trombone player about to go on his biggest show ever, but just as he's about to go on stage, he gets kicked in the head by a donkey and then forced to play his greatest masterpiece. Now, my personal favorite version, the Nintendo DS version known as Resident Evil DS or Deadly Silence, includes the classic mode, a rebirth mode which features exclusive and reworked puzzles that utilize the Nintendo DS's features like the mic and touchscreen. There's a first-person battle mode that's included in the rebirth mode and its own minigame known as Master of Knifing. There's a reworked item menu for both modes including touchscreen support. The top screen is used for the map, ammo, and character's health, as it will glow to the color of your character's condition. When not moving your character, you can mess with both characters, Jill and Chris, by touching them in specific spots to see what their reaction is. Auto aim is included. You can do the 180-degree turn, reload while aiming, and even use a knife without having to equip it or take up a slot in your inventory. It simply works like it did with Resident Evil 4. Just like the PC version, you can skip the door animations, even skip the in-engine cutscenes, and Kenneth's death was not censored. However, the intro is still censored and it's in black and white. Some music tracks are not present and they're instead replaced with alternate tracks. Most qualities such as the FMVs, backgrounds, and sound quality does seem a bit low, but it still looks like a perfect port of the original Resident Evil in a tiny screen. Also, a local wireless multiplayer mode was featured which allows you to play up to 4 players, and you can choose any of the Alpha team members and Bravo team members excluding Edward Dewey, Joseph Frost, and Brad Vickers. There are 2 modes to choose from, which is co-op and competitive mode, but as I explained it on the 10 Awesome Facts video for Resident Evil DS, these modes did not meet expectations. That's as much as I can say for all the versions of the original Resident Evil game. After doing all the research needed for this video, I'm surprised to see just how many versions of the original Resident Evil have their own exclusive features. I never felt like I would ever want to try out the Sega Saturn version, but I'd love to play through those exclusive features, especially for the PC version. But can you imagine how this game would be like if they ever released the classic Resident Evil game with every single exclusive feature included? I couldn't let go of the Nintendo DS version because of the features that version included, so I can only wonder how the game would be if they included every single exclusive feature all in one game. In my opinion, that would be better than the remastered version of RE1, just because it's so much extra content. Maybe someday a very dedicated fan will make a version of the original Resident Evil with every feature included. Perhaps the Nintendo Switch would be the best platform to try it out with, mainly because Resident Evil Deadly Silence has touchscreen features. But what do you think? Is this something you'd like to see? And which exclusive features did you like the most? Let me know in the comments, because as of now, That's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if so, be sure to leave a like, share with others, and subscribe if you haven't. And if you'd like to see some extra content, or you'd like to see your name at the end of the videos, then feel free to support the channel by donating a single dollar to my Patreon. There are also additional perks for donating more than $1. The link is on the description, along with the link to my Facebook page, Tumblr, DeviantArt, and Twitter. But anyways, I'll see you all in the next video, and remember to have an awesome day.